They call it the American dream on a sizzling plate. Marbled ribeyes, garlic butter melting like gold, and servers smiling as if nothing in this world could ever go wrong. But what if behind those glowing steakhouse signs lurked something far darker than undercooked meat? What if the real danger wasn't food poisoning, but a system quietly feeding off your trust? Serving racism, wage theft, sexual harassment, and financial fraud alongside your baked potato. In a country where more than 1 billion restaurant meals are eaten every week, how many are silently seasoned with exploitation? And how many working-class families are unknowingly paying the price with their health, their dignity, and their paychecks while corporate empires gorge themselves on loopholes and corruption? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal. And today we're ripping the tablecloth off America's most beloved steakhouses. Don't panic just yet. At the end of each part, we'll show you safer, honest alternatives you can trust. Because after what you're about to learn, you may never look at that steak the same way again. Number 1. Ruth's Chris. Picture this. Velvet booths glowing under golden light, thick steaks hissing like sirens on molten platters, and servers waltzing through the haze of garlic butter as if they were delivering salvation on porcelain. That's the theater Ruth's Chris wants you to buy into. The illusion that as long as you can still afford a slab of prime beef, you're somehow safe from the storm. But behind those white tablecloths is a stunt so brazen it could make your social security check curl up and hide. This steakhouse titan quietly siphoned off $20 million from a federal rescue fund meant for collapsing small businesses, even as neighborhood diners were being bulldozed into bankruptcy. It wasn't a simple oversight. It was a surgical heist dressed in fine print. While working-class families stood in unemployment lines that wrapped around city blocks, Ruth's Chris strutted into the Paycheck Protection Program and claimed they were small, splitting their empire of over 150 global locations into bite-sized paperwork morsels, just under 500 employees each. On paper, they were mom and pop. In reality, they were feasting on over $55 million in profits only 2 years later. That's not survival. That's looting in a tuxedo. The fury was instant. A Change.org petition didn't just circulate, it detonated, pulling in signatures by the hundreds of thousands like a vacuum. Across the country, family steakhouses were dark and empty, their signs fading like old gravestones, while Ruth's Chris lounges glimmered on, fueled by cash that was supposed to keep the desperate alive. It was like watching the lifeboats on the Titanic reserved for the first-class passengers while the orchestra drowned. Under crushing public outrage, the chain reluctantly promised to give the money back, hoping the gesture would mop up the bad press like a soggy dinner roll. But for millions who lost paychecks, savings, and dignity, while this empire quietly hoarded their rescue funds, the taste of betrayal still burns hotter than their overpriced fillets. And here's the rot at the core. This wasn't just one company's moral slip. It exposed how the system was rigged to let corporate giants squeeze through legal loopholes, while real workers were left gasping for air. If Ruth's Chris could hijack relief cash meant to save your neighbor's family grill during a national collapse, what else might these corporate castles be quietly draining while you sleep? Maybe that's the real flavor of their success. Not aged beef, but aged corruption, marinated in loopholes and seared in greed. Number 2. Fleming's Prime. Pull back the curtain of candlelit charm at Fleming's Prime Steakhouse and Wine Bar, and the glow turns sour fast. Like finding a price tag dangling from the bottom of your fillet, this 64-location empire, famous for whispering luxury in your ear while draining your wallet, has been caught marinating something far uglier than dry-aged beef, an alleged scheme that left its own workers scrambling to survive on pennies while polishing the silver for millionaires. While customers walked out patting their bellies and tossing tips like confetti at a parade, many servers trudged back to dish pits and prep rooms where gratuities evaporated like spilled wine, because Fleming's allegedly forced them into hours of unpaid backroom labor where tips don't exist. According to Reuters, these workers were officially paid just $2.13 an hour, a figure that might have seemed acceptable back when gas was cheaper than coffee, but is now barely enough to buy the lemon slice for your water. This wasn't just bad optics, it detonated public outrage. People who once saw Fleming's as a splurge-worthy sanctuary suddenly saw it as a velvet-wrapped sweatshop, where the people orchestrating your luxury dining experience were quietly scraping grease from pans just to scrape together rent. The hypocrisy stung. A steakhouse selling opulence by the ounce, allegedly running on wages that couldn't buy a bus fare home. And while the lawsuit over these wage practices still creeps through the courts, the damage to Fleming's reputation has already been carved deep, like initials on an old oak table. It exposed a rot baked into the business model. That lavish dining depends on an invisible underclass carrying the weight while wearing a smile. This isn't just about one chain. It's a mirror for an industry that still pretends tipping can cover starvation wages, like slapping whipped cream on an empty plate and calling it dessert. For working-class Americans who have spent decades clocking in just to stay afloat, the revelation hit like a sucker punch. The steak might come medium rare, but the treatment of workers came ice cold, and it forced many diners to wonder if every bite they savored was being seasoned with someone else's exhaustion. Because if an empire like Fleming's can allegedly squeeze its staff dry while charging you $50 for a ribeye, what does that say about the value placed on human effort in this country? Maybe the real flavor lingering at Fleming's isn't truffle butter or Cabernet. It's the bitter aftertaste of corporate greed, served rare and bleeding. Number 3. Lori's Prime Rib. Step into the marble-trimmed world of Lori's the Prime Rib, and you might expect to be greeted by the crackle of silverware and the perfume of slow-roasted beef. Not the ghost of a beauty pageant dressed as a dining room. Yet for decades, this California-based steakhouse empire quietly ran its gilded dining halls like an old boys club flipped inside out, where men could bus tables but never dare carry the actual plates. In an era when most restaurants at least pretend to champion equality, Lori's was accused of handpicking its frontline servers exclusively from women, as if the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had never existed, and every tray had to be carried with a painted smile. The truth ripped into public view when a male busboy dared to aim higher, and was blocked from becoming a waiter solely because he wasn't born with the right chromosomes. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission took aim, and the lawsuit stripped away the chain's polished facade like a tablecloth yanked off mid-service. According to court filings, Lori's had allegedly upheld this women-only policy for decades, a practice as outdated as rotary phones and about as defensible as serving steak with a straw. The case ended with the company paying over $1 million in settlement money, a figure that sliced through their reputation far more than their profits. Even more damning, they were forced to sign a legal decree committing to end the discriminatory hiring system, and to finally allow men onto their elite serving staff by 2009. It was a staggering fall from grace. One of America's high-end temples of beef revealed to have been gatekeeping its own dining floor like a velvet-roped runway show. And while other chains like Hooters and Twin Peaks have managed to keep similar women-only hiring models alive by exploiting legal loopholes and labeling their servers as entertainers, Lori's couldn't hide behind the same smoke and mirrors. Their image of timeless class suddenly looked more like a taxidermied relic, perfectly posed but very much dead. For older working-class Americans who've spent their lives clawing for fair treatment just to keep the lights on, this revelation landed like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about one man losing a promotion. It was about watching yet another corporate castle built on the bones of exclusion, still standing. Tall while pretending it had always welcomed everyone, it made people question what other invisible gates might still be standing in places that claim to serve the public. If Lori's could spend decades quietly deciding who's allowed to hand over a steak based on gender, how many other chains are still playing by unspoken rules the rest of us don't get to see? Behind the gleaming silver carts and prime rib pomp, the real flavor that lingers isn't rosemary or just. It's the stale aftertaste of discrimination, reheated and served with a side of denial. Number 4. Nusr Et, Salt Bay. Behind the glittering facade of Nusr Et, where gold leaf steaks arrive like treasure on silver trays and the air smells more like money than meat, lurks a saga that could make even the toughest ribeye go cold. Born from the viral theatrics of Turkish chef Nusret Gökçe, the internet's self-anointed Salt Bay, famous for showering meat with pinches of salt like he was blessing it from heaven. This global steakhouse empire stretches from Miami to Istanbul, Dubai, London, and Abu Dhabi. It sells the illusion that you're buying more than dinner. You're buying a front row ticket to luxury itself. But while diners film the glitter and glamour, ex-employees have painted a far darker picture. A kitchen culture described not as elite, but as tyrannical. Former staff have accused Gokchi and his restaurants of aggression, sexual harassment, workplace discrimination, tip skimming, and flat-out refusing to pay overtime. Beneath the sparkle, they claim the empire is built on unpaid hours and silenced voices, a place where the knives stay sharp and the ethics stay dull. The scandals didn't stop at the kitchen door. One of the loudest firestorms ignited in Miami, where a video showed Gokchi theatrically serving Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, grinning as he sliced meat for a man widely accused of starving his own people. Miami locals erupted in fury. How could someone who courts dictators be allowed to run a luxury restaurant in a city built by exiles who fled them? For many, it was like watching someone pop champagne for a house guest while their neighbors were trapped in a flood. Critics argued that the scene shredded whatever thin boundaries still existed between entertainment and exploitation, showing just how easily wealth can launder reputations. And while Gokchi still struts through his dining rooms like a rock star with a salt halo, lawsuits continue to shadow him like smoke from a grease fire. For older working-class Americans, people who've spent their lives clocking overtime just to afford ground beef, the whole spectacle feels like an insult wrapped in gold foil. It isn't just the $1,000 steaks or the cartoonish theatrics. It's the idea that behind this empire's opulence lies a trail of alleged wage theft and abuse, the same kind of corporate rot that chews up honest labor and spits out glitter for the elite. If someone can build a global shrine to excess while allegedly underpaying his workers and cozying up to dictators, what does that say about who really gets rewarded in this system? The flavor that lingers at Nusret isn't truffle or luxury. It's the metallic tang of power gone rotten, sprinkled not with salt, but with contempt. Number 5. Haas's Steakhouse. At first glance, Haas's Steak and Sea House looks like the kind of down-home joint where the world slows down. Soft lighting, wood-paneled booths, and plates piled high with steak, shrimp, and burgers that have been feeding small-town America since 1983. But peel back the cozy facade and the picture curdles into something straight out of a fever dream. The kind of nightmare that makes you question what's really simmering behind those swinging kitchen doors. In one of the most bizarre scandals ever to scorch the steakhouse world, 2 female employees once dragged Haas's into federal court with accusations that sounded too disturbing to be real, yet were taken seriously enough to be heard under oath. They claim not only that they were groped by managers and sexually harassed by other staff, but that their tormentors staged a grotesque performance in the kitchen, stabbing, mutilating, and deep frying a Barbie doll right in front of them, as if mocking their humanity like it was just another side dish to toss in the fryer. What followed was a courtroom spectacle that ripped the curtain off Haas's wholesome image. The women alleged that when they dared to complain, they weren't met with justice. They were punished with graveyard shifts and scraps of hours as if their paychecks were ransom notes for their silence. A federal magistrate ultimately validated their claims of retaliation, confirming that the restaurant had punished them for speaking out, though the court stopped short of ruling that the managers had intentionally inflicted emotional distress. Still, for many who read the court records, the legal nuance didn't erase the stench. It showed a system where workers were forced to endure abuse, then punished for daring to resist, all while the restaurant kept selling itself as a safe slice of Americana. It was like discovering that the cheerful mascot on your ketchup bottle had a criminal record. For older working-class Americans who've spent decades scrubbing pans, hauling trays, and swallowing mistreatment just to keep the lights on, the Haas's case felt like a slap wrapped in grease paper. It wasn't just the allegations themselves, grotesque as they were, but the casual cruelty of a corporate culture that seemed to treat human dignity as optional, like a condiment they could forget to bring to the table. It forced diners to ask a chilling question. If a place can serve deep-fried toys and retaliation in the same breath, what else might be lurking behind the kitchen door? Beneath the smiling family restaurant branding, the flavor that lingers at Haas's isn't salt or steak. It's the acrid aftertaste of fear, humiliation, and a system that would rather burn its workers than protect them. Number 6. Ryan's Steakhouse. Ryan's family. Steakhouse once wrapped itself in the cozy image of Americana. The kind of place where the salad bar never ends, the iced tea keeps coming, and everyone is supposedly welcome at the table. But in reality, behind the clatter of plates and the smell of buttered rolls, the chain was quietly rotting from within, like a banquet left out overnight. In a scandal that stunned loyal customers and gutted its reputation, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission exposed that Ryan's wasn't just mishandling steaks. It was allegedly cooking up a culture soaked in racism and sexism. According to the federal complaint, black employees were fired solely because of their skin color, while white staff who dared to socialize with them were branded race traitors and other vicious slurs by managers. At the same time, female workers were allegedly terrorized, called degrading names, grabbed, and sexually harassed as if their safety were just another optional side dish. The image of a family-friendly steak buffet crumbled into something darker, more like a plantation-themed nightmare hiding behind a neon sign. The reckoning was swift. Ryan's was ordered to pay $500,000 in damages, divided among 7 former employees whose lives had been scarred by the abuse. But the stain went far deeper than the settlement check. The case exposed how management allegedly treated prejudice not as a problem to be fixed, but as a policy to be enforced, and it poisoned the very spirit the brand claimed to embody. Just a few years later, the company operating Ryan's shuttered 81 locations for underperformance, though for many disgusted former customers, the collapse felt less like bad business and more like karma finally showing up with the bill. What had been sold as a warm, safe corner of American dining had revealed itself as a corporate plantation in disguise, serving up mashed potatoes on the backs of the people it demeaned. For older working-class Americans, many of whom have spent their lives battling to be treated as equals while scraping by on minimum wages, the revelations hit like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just the racism or the sexism, it was the betrayal of trust, the realization that even the places that promise a family table might be quietly deciding who's allowed to sit at it. Ryan's marketed itself as a slice of home, yet behind the sneeze guards and dessert trays lurked the cold machinery of hate dressed up as hospitality. And that's the most bitter flavor of all. Not overcooked steak, but systemic discrimination, served with a smile and a side of sweet tea. Number 7. Ponderosa Steakhouse. Ponderosa Steakhouse once strutted across America like a cowboy king, dishing out ribeyes, baked potatoes, and all-you-can-eat salad bars at square deal prices that made families feel like they were beating the system. Born in Kokomo, Indiana in 1968, the chain galloped to an astonishing 736 locations by the late 80s, a stampede of beef and burgers that seemed unstoppable. For small-town families, a Ponderosa dinner was a ritual of comfort, but behind the red vinyl booths and cheery jingles, a financial sinkhole was quietly being dug. By the early 2000s, that sinkhole would swallow entire communities in one gulp. A regional manager named Fred Bokum, who controlled 15 Ponderosa locations, was caught running one of the most reckless stunts in steakhouse history, floating over $824 million in fraudulent checks through company accounts in less than 2 years. It was like trying to lasso the moon with a shoelace, and when it snapped, it dragged the whole herd down with it. The fallout was brutal. Ponderosa hemorrhaged cash so fast that multiple restaurants were forced to shut their doors overnight, leaving cooks, servers, and dishwashers suddenly unemployed, their livelihoods vaporized not by bad service or poor sales, but by boardroom betrayal. Bokum was eventually sent to prison for felony bank fraud, yet the damage was already branded deep into the chain's hide. While the company limped on into the pandemic era, the collapse had already broken its legs. Today, fewer than 24 locations remain open, a ghost herd grazing on memories. The empire that once promised big beef for small bucks had been gutted from the inside by greed in a necktie. And for many former workers, the lesson was cruelly simple. The steaks might be tender, but the corporate loyalty was cooked to ash. For older working-class Americans who know all too well how quickly a steady job can vanish, the Ponderosa implosion was a grim reminder that the real danger isn't always in the food, it's in the people holding the keys. These were communities where paychecks kept roofs patched, fridges stocked, and kids in shoes wiped out in the blink of an accountant's pen. It showed how fragile the system really is when one man's fraud can scatter hundreds of families like tumbleweeds. And that's the bitter taste Ponderosa leaves behind now. Not grilled sirloin or buttery rolls, but the acrid smoke of trust burned down to cinders. Number 8. Ribeye Steakhouse. Ribeye Steakhouse has long been the hometown darling of North Carolina, the kind of place where folks swap Sunday gossip over sizzling plates, where the servers remember your name, and where the prices seem frozen in some gentler decade. But in the spring of 2012, that familiar comfort curdled into fear as the chain found itself at the center of a salmonella storm that sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Nashville, North Carolina. What began as a few stomach cramps quietly snowballed into a full-blown public health scare. 75 people reported falling ill after dining at the restaurant on or near April 29th, and investigators quickly drew a troubling line straight back to Ribye's kitchen. The image of cozy Americana cracked like an eggshell. Suddenly the talk of the town wasn't the friendly waitstaff or the early bird special, but who might be next to spend the night curled up on the bathroom floor. The most chilling detail wasn't just the number of victims, but the element of betrayal it carried. Ribeye was supposed to be safe, the place you could bring your grandkids without a second thought. Instead, it became ground zero for an outbreak of a bacteria that isn't even supposed to thrive on steak, because salmonella rarely survives when beef is cooked to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. That left investigators eyeing the chain's burgers with suspicion. Ground beef, after all, is where bacteria like salmonella loves to hide. So hide it, and one sloppy batch can turn a cheerful dinner rush into a domino line of sickness. The official link was never conclusively proven in court, but for the families who spent days hunched over buckets after what was meant to be a quiet meal, the unproven label felt like a cruel technicality for older working-class Americans, the kind who've pinched pennies all week just to treat their families to a rare night out. The outbreak landed like a gut punch. It didn't just shatter faith in one small-town chain, it rattled their trust in the entire promise of dining out. If even the neighborhood steakhouse, with its smiling servers and flag-festooned menus, could send dozens to the ER in one night, what did safe even mean anymore? Ribeye Steakhouse once symbolized comfort, consistency, and community. But after that spring night, what lingered wasn't the smell of grilled beef or buttered rolls. It was the acrid aftertaste of fear, clinging to every bite like a shadow no amount of salt could shake off. Number 9. Outback Steakhouse. Outback Steakhouse loves to brand itself as a rugged slice of Aussie adventure. Boomerangs on the walls, steaks the size of your forearm, and enough faux Outback charm to make you forget you're sitting off the interstate. With over 1,100 locations worldwide, it's become one of the most recognizable steakhouse chains on the planet, feeding millions who trust its image of hearty reliability. But that global sprawl comes with an invisible risk. The bigger the herd, the easier it is for one sick cow to poison the lot. In 2012, that risk snapped into public view when a woman named Kathleen Nicholson accused Outback of serving her something far more sinister than shrimp on the Barbie, a salmonella infection that landed her in the hospital. Nicholson testified that just hours after dining at Outback with her family, her body revolted. Violent, vomiting, fever, and the kind of stomach pain that makes time crawl. She was convinced the culprit had been her meal at Outback, and her lawsuit sent a ripple of unease through customers who'd always considered the chain as safe as it was familiar. If a place that promises consistency down to the napkin folds could unleash a pathogen like salmonella, what else might be slipping through its sprawling supply chain? But the courtroom became a cold place for sympathy. Judges ruled that the timing alone wasn't enough, that Nicholson couldn't prove the infection hadn't come from something she ate earlier in the day. With no airtight evidence, her case was dismissed. A procedural victory for Outback, but a public relations scar that never fully faded. For older working-class Americans who've spent years clutching coupons just to give their families an occasional night of comfort, the case struck a raw nerve. It wasn't just the sickness itself. It was the way it revealed how fragile the promise of safety really is in a corporate food empire. Even if Nicholson's case couldn't be proven beyond a shadow of doubt, it shattered the illusion that sheer size equals safety. Outback sells the dream of reliability, but its sheer scale makes it vulnerable to the tiniest lapse becoming a tidal wave. And that's the unsettling flavor that still clings to the brand. Not the smoky char of a perfectly seared sirloin, but the faint metallic taste of doubt, lingering just long enough to make you wonder what's really sizzling on that plate. Unmask the hidden rot behind your dinner plate. Subscribe now and never eat blindfolded in this broken food empire again.
Thanks so much for sticking with us to the very end. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our daily updates. And now feel free to check out some of our latest and most popular videos showing up on your screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.